evening and welcome to this November 18th council work session. I know that Claire is on her way and Alan is on his way, so I expect we'll be a full contingent soon. And so I think we can roll right into our single item of business today.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Sarah Maderi, City Manager Pro Tem. I'm actually going to turn it over to Chelsea Clinton, our Sustainability Analyst, but I want to just say that at least one person has approached me about having a bit of a hearing impairment, and so just a reminder for us to speak into our microphones, in particular staff, as you're doing the presentation.
Great. Me too, because I can't.
Great. Well, good evening. My name is Chelsea Clinton. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Eugene. Thank you for having me here again tonight for an update on the CAP 2.0. We'll jump into that update on the CAP in just a moment, but first I wanted to take some time to share some fun news. We heard a couple of weeks ago that Eugene will be featured on CDP's A-list this year in recognition of our community's work around climate. CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, is a platform used by cities, investors, companies, and other organizations worldwide to share and compare efforts to address climate change. It's a select group that receives the A-list distinction. Only 40 other cities in North America will be on the 2019 A-list. We know there's hard work ahead, and it's important to take a moment to remember that we are leaders in this work, and our community continues to push the envelope. I'm also very excited to share the draft of the CAP 2.0 tonight. You should have a copy in front of you. We released the plan publicly on November 12th, and we hope to finalize the document early in the new year. Between now and then, staff will be doing some public engagement, and I'll talk more about that process a little later in the presentation. The CAP 2.0 document in front of you is the culmination of about 2 years of formal work and several additional years of preparation for that process. We started with the CRO update in 2016, where City Council set the community greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal. In 2017, the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group, a blue ribbon committee on community members, came together to provide direction for the CAP 2.0 project plan. Then in 2018, we formally kicked off the project. We began meeting with community partners, including the Eugene Climate Collaborative Partners, and started to build the document. We did outreach around the process, and at the end of 2018, we shared the preliminary results of our analysis, which showed that the Eugene Climate Collaborative projects and plans would get us about 40% of the way to our climate goal. In 2019, you, City Council, asked for additional strategies, and you began the process of asking, what more can we do? We also continued to meet with our partners, facilitated the equity panel, and did additional community outreach. Today, we want to take a moment to celebrate all of that work and to say a big thank you to Eugene. First, I want to acknowledge the hard work that the Mayor's ad hoc work group did in 2017. That group set the course for us to create an honest and authentic plan. Many communities around the country have set ambitious goals like the CRO. Few have taken the next step to fully understand the magnitude and implications of those goals. Thanks to this group's vision, we understand what it's going to take and we know where we are heading. Over the last 2 years, we've participated in 13 community engagement events attended by more than 2,000 people, including 5 Party in the Parks events, 2 Making It Happen planning fairs, 3 CAP 2.0 open houses, the Green Lane Neighborhood Leaders Council, and more. We also met with 6 student groups, meeting with more than 200 students. Finally, thank you to the Equity Panel and the Eugene Climate Collaborative Partners. The Equity Panel included 8 panelists from 6 organizations that work with marginalized communities. They met 10 times over 5 months. More than 60 people from the Eugene Climate Collaborative Partners contributed as well. Combined, these partners contributed 88 actions that you see in the CAP 2.0 document. Some of those who contributed to the planner in the audience today, so thank you very much to all who helped. We really appreciate all your efforts, and we couldn't have done this without you. Now we'll dive into the document and talk a little bit about the content. So again, based on the leadership and vision provided by City Council and the Mayor's Work Group, the document in front of you is unique compared to other community climate action plans. The process to create the document was data-driven and focused on understanding what our community is realistically prepared to accomplish over the next 5 to 10 years. The result is threefold. We have a number to go along with our CRO goals. We need to reduce our emissions by 790,000 metric tons carbon equivalent annually by 2030 to be on track. We have our number and we know where we're heading. Second, we know what we and our partners are ready to do. The actions in the plan represent each organization's commitment to this work. Third, we understand that more action is needed, and we are actively looking for ways to make that happen. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Next, I'll talk about our community engagement. So we shifted our engagement to focus on building our community and capacity with this plan. Our goal was not only to engage, our goal was only to engage new and more voices, but also to build a table for those voices to continue to engage in our community's climate conversation long after the CAP 2.0 ends. We focused on two groups, the Eugene Climate Collaborative and the Equity Panel. The Eugene Climate Collaborative, or the ECC, includes 12 organizations that have significant oversight and impact on community-wide reduction of fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions. Or they have the ability to affect or alter systems that will enable the community to adapt and prepare for climate change. By starting with the engagement of systems-level actors, we are laying the foundation to make it easier for everyone, individuals, households, businesses, and other organizations to take action that support the CRO goals. And I won't read through them all, but the logos of all the ECC partners are up on the screen. The Equity Panel is another important component of our outreach. Research shows that climate change disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. The CAP 2.0 process is the first step in acknowledging that many of the systems we have in place need to be improved to adequately serve these communities as the impacts of climate change intensify. When we look to the future, I expect climate leadership to be measured by how a community is listening to, partnering, supporting, and elevating marginalized communities. You will notice that the Equity Panel recommendations are included in the CAP 2.0 document right alongside the ECC actions. While we don't know the path forward on all of these actions, we are committed to continuing to work with these organizations to find ways to address their concerns and work with them to address and prepare for the impacts of climate change. This plan is also unique in that we took a very local look at what the impacts of climate change will mean for Eugene. Our technical consultants, Good Company, created a white paper about the expected impacts in Eugene, and it's included in Appendix 1 of the CAP 2.0, which you can find online. I'll read just a few of these stats, which I think are really impactful. So we expect that the average summer temperature will increase by 10 to 12 degrees by 2100. We expect the snowpack in the Cascades to be nearly gone by 2040. And we expect population increase due to climate migration because we expect that Eugene will be a relatively nice place to live for humans compared to other places in the country. I've been talking a lot about the structure of the plan for the last few minutes, but I would be remiss if I didn't take a few minutes to talk about all the great actions that are being undertaken by our community partners. So we'll go through those now, and I'll talk through the 4 sections. And each slide contains quite a few actions, and those are just a sample of those in the plan. I'll just focus on 1 or 2 on each slide. So for energy used in buildings, we focused on the source of our energy and also energy efficiency. And I'll talk about Action B11. The University of Oregon and Lane Community College both created their own climate action plans that were wrapped up during our project process. And they include a lot of measures around energy efficiency for their campuses, which is great. Transportation fuels was another focus area. And as you've all heard before, Action T1, the transportation system plan, is a really important action in our plan. And has one of the biggest impacts in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that includes the actions from many of our ECC partners. Consumption was another focus area. I'll talk about Action C1, the Love Food Not Waste program. And as you all know, we recently rolled out the curbside food waste collection program, which is very exciting and has the potential to reduce our emissions significantly in our community. And then I'll also talk about C12 here, which was one of the equity panel recommendations. And they offered, stakeholders offer incentives for employees to attend workshops on waste management, composting, energy use, climate change, gardening, transportation, and carpooling. And finally, resiliency. So Action R3 talks about eWeb, who's providing emergency water stations at various schools and public spaces around the region. And I also want to note that I just listed the areas of the equity panel recommendations on this slide. The equity panel had 18 recommendations around resiliency, which really speaks to their focus and concern with what we need to do in this area. So as I mentioned, there are many, many more actions in the plan. I encourage you to take a look, and it captures a significant community commitment to this work. But as I alluded to before, and as you all know very well, we're still looking to see what else can we do. So now I'll move into the additional strategies. So the 12 strategies summarized on this slide correspond to the additional strategies included in the packet in front of you. And there's a printed packet in front of you all. If you look at that packet, it contains additional information about each strategy, including some of the preliminary analysis we've done on the environmental, economic, and equity impacts. And that packet is also now online, so everyone can look it up at home. So we've talked about these strategies in the past, including a detailed overview of the actions 1 through 7 during the October 16 and 28 work sessions. And so we did a little color coding here. Those actions are highlighted in blue on this slide, and we won't revisit those in detail today. I'll give a quick overview of actions 8 through 12 now, and those actions are highlighted in green. So action 8 is to lobby for state and federal action. State and federal action are an important part of the CAP 2.0 equation, which will be needed for Eugene to achieve its climate goals. Items like the Cap and Invest bill from the 2019 legislative session and things like corporate average fuel economy standards or CAFE standards are extremely impactful at the local level. City Council's 2015 resolution supporting a carbon pricing policy for the state of Oregon has allowed staff to take a strong stance on climate legislation at the state level, and we will continue to do so. Oop, too fast. Action 9 is to reduce refrigerant loss. Refrigerant gases are used in appliances such as air conditioners and refrigerators. Refrigerants have a large impact on the atmosphere when they leak from their cooling systems. About 90% of the loss occurs during disposal. So action 9 is to consider if there's a program that the city or a partner could provide to address this source of emissions in our community. Action 10 is to capture biogas from organic waste. There's an opportunity to produce biogas from organic material separated from the solid waste stream. Partners like MWMC and Lane County are already exploring this idea, so this action would be continuing to partner with those folks and pushing forward to see what we can do. Action 11 is an offset program. So carbon offsets are a reduction in emissions by purchasing ownership of greenhouse gas emission reductions from a verified offset project. So this is always an option for us if we need another way to meet our goals. And finally, Action 12, a community innovation fund. This is the idea that we could create a fund to support ideas generated by the community. And staff are currently working with the neighborhood involvement team to understand if the neighborhood matching grant program could be expanded to include sustainability projects, and that's looking promising. So as with the past couple of work sessions, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback about which additional strategies you hope to move forward as part of the CAP 2.0 process. And as staff have looked at the list of 12 actions, we see that most of the actions either need further research, additional policy direction, funding, or all three. And in research, in this case, we mean that we can think through how to implement the strategy in our community, what pace would make sense, what the equity implications would be, or how we could partner with the marginalized communities to implement them, and further investigation into the cost to the city. So we're really focused on what research, policy direction, and funding would be needed for each. With that in mind, and with the impression that you are interested in moving forward on most of the actions, I came up with some ideas about how we could move all of these strategies forward, and we've color-coded again. So in the blue, you see a lot of the 3 actions associated with the natural gas process and with the Northwest Natural. And we can move those forward, and we've heard interest in moving all those forward as part of the franchise agreement negotiations. In the salmon, there are ideas that need all 3 of those elements that I mentioned before: more research, policy direction, and funding. So for those, if you want to move forward on them, I propose that we'll come back soon with more research on how we can implement those locally and move forward on that policy direction and funding piece. In the green, there are items that staff can move forward on now, and we may come back to you for pieces around policy direction and funding, but we have what we need to move forward. So for example, we talked to you about the TSP being updated to meet the CRO goals. We already have analysis underway now, and we're working to understand what that would mean and the cost. So we can come back to you once we have that information. And with the EV strategy, we have a plan, and we need to do more research, and we can come back to you once that's done. We'll probably have some capital funding requests and so on, but for now we can move forward without more direction. And then in the orange, we have the offset program, and that will always be an option. So shifting gears, I wanted to give you an idea of what's next for the sustainability work. I won't read through all the items, but a few that I'll draw your attention to, of course, are the Northwest Natural franchise agreement negotiations and whatever associated climate action you all land on. And the 2020 legislative session are very impactful. And then I also want to draw your attention to the reporting piece at the bottom and note that I've heard from you that you really want a dashboard, and we'll be working on that early in the next year. And then finally, what's next for the CAP 2.0? As I mentioned, we have some public engagement planned. We'll have community outreach at a Fix-It Fair on November 24th. That's at the Lane Event Center from 12 to 3. And we'll be holding some focus groups with the goal of getting diverse input from a number of stakeholders in the community, including business, folks who work for the equity panel organizations, and a number of others. And we'll compile the information from the focus groups, the Fix-It Fair, and we have an online survey happening right now. We'll compile all that information into a report and get that to you in late December. And then we'll come back for another work session in January. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a very thorough report of a lot of information packed into a brief presentation, so thank you very much for that. Do I have counselors who are ready to ask questions or need clarifications? Greg, okay, take it away.
So let me ask you this. Have you worked on or looked at the financial implications of this? How much money is this going to cost us, and where are we going to get the money from?
I'll start on that piece. I will say the packet in front of you includes some preliminary information, and then I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Well, I think once we know what that is, I think we'll start thinking about how we build that into the upcoming budgets, FY '21, '22, '23.
You got a ballpark figure?
I don't know off the top of my head what the ballpark is.
It depends on which actions you choose. So if we think about the Northwest Natural actions, the cost to the city might not be very high, but the cost to community is very different, where EV infrastructure, for example, might be a higher cost to the city. So it just depends kind of where we land.
Okay, anybody else? Claire?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, for the update to the plan. I have similar comments as what Councilor Evans raised, but first I also want to mention, you started off, you spoke about community capacity. And I think this is such an important and huge lift. It's going to require not just the city of Eugene, not just our large leverage stakeholders, but pretty much everybody in the city to get on board and to be part of this effort. And I think it's particularly crucial if we're going to move forward together and not end up being fractured around this as a community, which I think is a very possible outcome as we start to push on some of these things, like, for instance, the Northwest Natural franchise. Some people in our community are going to feel very threatened by that, and maybe rightly so. And so what I'm saying right now is as much to my fellow counselors and staff as it is to the folks sitting here in the audience. I think there needs to be a much broader landscape of people who are coming to, maybe if they can't come to our meetings, communicating with us in other ways. I think we need to expand the base of people who want us to take these actions, and that's because part of it is we're going to have to find ways to pay for it, and that's people's tax dollars. So I think we really need to think seriously about how we are bringing other folks into the conversation. I think our equity panel is a fantastic start, and that needs to be broadened. And I think, you know, I know there were thousands of people who came out for the student climate strike, but once we start talking about pocketbook issues and energy prices increasing and other things that may be outcomes of some of the policies we want to pursue, I think we need to be prepared, and we need to make sure we're ready to engage in a dialogue and bring the community along with us. So I think the Community Innovation Fund, which may seem like a little footnote, could be a really powerful way for us to do some of that work. I think it could really give us capacity, a greater community capacity, and provide a launch pad for innovative ideas and projects. So, you know, I think we need to be doing pretty much all of the things we've outlined here. We know even all of these things will likely fall short of our goals. And some of them are out of control, such as our control, such as what the state and federal government might do. But the things we can do ourselves, we should be pursuing, and that's going to require more financial resources. So I think we really need to start thinking about these pieces and what they might cost, including staffing, and also how we engage those other large leverage stakeholders in providing some of that financial capacity.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I completely agree with Claire. Thank you so much. And like she said, not just bringing folks along in the conversation about how we're educating people as we're going along. Not everyone is at the same place of understanding these. Some of these issues are pretty complex, and it's taken us a long time to figure everything out. So we can't expect the whole community to be on the same page as us. I did have a question on 6 and 7 on the multicolored thing. You said they say moving forward. So do we have a timeline on when you think realistically we might get some hard information back?
Sorry.
That was, sorry, TSP and Eugene Electric Vehicles strategy.
So I'd have to check in with our transportation planning team to figure out the TSP timeline, but I know that they were hoping to get that ready, the information ready to go early in the new year, but I'd have to double check with them. For the EV strategy, we really hoped that we could move forward on all the elements we included in that strategy within the next 5 years. And if you look within that strategy, some are short-term, which we'd hope to get them done in the next 2 years. But I think as we hear from you, we can continue to prioritize.
Great, thanks.
Good. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to follow up on Jennifer's question. She hit exactly what I wanted to talk about. But with item number 6, I don't see Rob out here. I want a little more depth on what's meant by item 6 from you now, if that's possible. You just said we have what we need and staff's planning on coming back. I don't know that we've had any kind of in-depth conversations about strategies and tactics for revising the TSP. So I'm hopeful that's going to come back to us as a wide menu of options that the council might choose from, as well as maybe hearing from us on, you know, options we're in favor of or the ones we're not, and effect and depth of impact of each and that sort of thing. So Is there it sounds like you had a strategy already in place and we're about to hear, so I guess I was hoping to hear what that means.
So on October 16th, we talked a little bit about the TSP work that's directly related to this strategy. And if I'm not mistaken, the project is called the Vision Eval Project. And we're working with LCOG to understand different levers we could push within the TSP to help us reach the CRO goals. We've been working on that work for some time now, and we're hoping that it'll wrap up soon. But it's pretty complex work, as you can imagine. And so we continue to have to spend a little more time than we anticipated. But I'd have to check in with Rob and his team to figure out the exact timeline.
And we'll see that at council. I'm sorry, you probably already said that.
I don't remember the date that we said that we'd be back in council. I think it was after the first of the year, though, earlier.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah, thanks to modern technology, I'm actually able to pay attention and listen to the entire presentation because it's webcast. So I heard everything you said. This is a long time in coming, getting to this point. Actually, Chelsea started this before her child was born, so it's a pretty big effort that has been done here. It's complex. And there's lots of community input into this, just an enormous amount. So I think celebrating this and where we've gotten to this is actually a pretty big accomplishment. Not very many folks have actually accomplished what we've done right here. And I'd rather look at that than nitpick all the little pieces, parts about it. So I also think of this Climate Action Plan 2.0 as kind of the beginning of a conversation. It's a work in progress. So this starts it, and we have to refine it as we go forward, and we have to continually come back to this thing on an annual basis with regular reports, maybe on a semi-annual basis or more often about how we're doing. We need the dashboard. We need a United Way thermometer of how we're getting there. So we need to talk about it more. But it's a work in progress rather than, oh, we've done it, so now we can move on. It's something that we'll be doing for a long time. Good thing Chelsea's young, because she'll be doing the rest of this for the rest of her life. Is it the perfect plan? No. Does it significantly move the dial? Yeah, it does. It has, and it is unique in a lot of ways. One, that it's, and maybe you can address this a little bit more. It's community-based, which is not often the case. It's consumption-based, which is pretty radical. And it actually, all the actions in here are actually committed to with funding identified in them. A lot of plans just have actions without any commitments or funding associated with them. So maybe you can address that a little bit more about why this is a little different than what other folks have tried to accomplish.
Yeah, so we really tried to build off our 2010 Climate Action Plan, which had a lot of great work, but we heard from our community, like, well, what happened to this action? And really we learned from that process that we needed each action to have an actor connected to it. So, and we took that a step farther, and we asked actors to say, like, yeah, we're actually committed to working on every single thing that makes it into this plan. So it's a very realistic plan, which is different than a lot of other plans that we see out there. It makes it very unique. And then we're also unique in that we do include consumption. And if you look in the plan, you'll notice that it's our biggest bucket of work. And that would be true of most communities, but actually most cities are like, we can't even handle that. We're just going to focus on transportation and energy because that's where, as a city, we have the most impact, the most levers. But to include our consumption is to say, actually, we're responsible for the emissions of the things we buy. We need to be thinking about that and taking it into account. So it's very unique, and that's why I call this a very honest and authentic plan.
Yeah, and that's significant. It's a big difference between just taking the direct emissions of what we do, transportation, what the energy you use, but also going upstream and taking consideration of the consumption that we have. So that makes it a bigger get that we have to get in terms of metric tons. Caution about talking about this plan in terms of just costs, because I made a living until I became the assistant director of ODO doing climate action plans for organizations all over the West Coast, saving them millions of dollars by doing actions that reduce greenhouse gases. So when we talk about this, Greg, we can't just talk about the cost. We have to talk about the benefits and the cost savings. So it's always a double side of that question. You can't just say, what does this cost? Because you have to say, what is the cost and what do we get in terms of savings and net benefits? So what's the net cost is probably the better way to think about this. I'll need a second round.
Okay, great. Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, and following along with similar thinking, I'm going back to the slide you had where you said what you really need going forward now is some research, some policy direction, and some funding. And I can't do the research for you, so obviously that's the piece that has to be generated in order to feed the other two, which is the policy direction, and that's us. You can't set the policy. It will really be our responsibility to set the policy, and that should theoretically be based on the research. So we have the best information in order to set the policy. And then the funding, and Alan's absolutely right. You have to look at both the cost up front and then the benefit later on. But because of the timing, you have to consider I have to make an upfront investment. I will get it paid back, and it will probably be paid back with interest. But what will be the source of funding for the upfront investment? And I totally believe in the outcome. I totally believe we will get the return. I'm just mindful of how will we finance it at the beginning part of it. And so the policy direction influences the funding, and we can go very quickly and expensively, or we can maybe go a little bit slower and less expensively, or a little bit somewhere in the middle. And I think the policy on how fast to go and how much money to invest, hopefully to get to the same goal, really becomes something that we can be as knowledgeable about as possible. Because if I believe we're in agreement on the goal we want to get to, but there's different ways to get there, involving different levels of impacts on the community, costs to the city, amount reached over certain amounts of time, those are very, very significant policy questions. And I want to make sure we have the most accurate, complete, and comprehensive information that we can have in order to be able to do that. Because I'm seeing us have to make some pretty big policy decisions. We just got started getting this far. Now there's more policy decisions to make. And I think having that research and the certified smart people, of which I don't necessarily consider myself when it comes to the research side, is the only way I'm going to be able to be thoughtful on what those policy directions should be. Because I have to gauge the outcome we're trying to achieve with the money spent and also the impact on the community. And I want to try to minimize the impact on the community. I still want to get to the goal, but I don't want to do it creating a lot of pain. And so I want to figure out what is the right amount of community impact and cost and outcome that will be the best for the community, and that's where I need your research more than ever.
Okay. Anybody else wanting a first round? Betty?
Okay. I hope we're considering the suggestions from everybody. Suggestions for things we ought to do, and also complaints about things we're not doing. And I think there are a lot of people who have ideas who haven't been heard from. One thing is maybe a small thing, but the city's still using leaf blowers, as far as I know. And I hear a lot of complaints about that. I hear that LTD is thinking of cutting out some bus routes, which means a lot more cars if it happens, which means more pollution. And on the other hand, the school board, the school system is busing people all over the town. School buses are going all over all the time. Maybe we need to try to influence other groups. Maybe if people went to their neighborhood schools, we wouldn't have so much pollution from buses going all over. Trains would be, we don't control trains, but we could try to use our influence to get the federal government to fund Amtrak. If more people traveled by train, there would be a lot less pollution. Tree protection's really important. We have never updated we had a tree ordinance which was remanded, we never did anything about it. If we have more, according to House Bill 2001, if we allow people to build 2 or 3 or 4 houses on one lot, that's going to be more destruction of trees, as well as more air pollution in a small space. So there are lots of things that I think people could tell us that maybe we should do. Whether we have power over it or not, we could try to use our influence over the other governmental bodies that do have power. Thank you.
Okay, Emily, do you want to turn? Okay, Alan and then Claire.
You know, this is going to be very difficult to do. There's a lot of people that don't want to see this happen. And there's a lot of pushback that will occur. And there's a lot of it that's out of our control. House Bill 2020, the cap and trade bill, is a great example of getting almost there, but not quite getting there. And this is like 250,000 of our 790,000 metric tons that we need. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. And so 2020, HB 2020, the cap and trade bill, and that hopefully temporary failure is a good example of how much pushback there is to getting stuff like this done. I won't even talk about the disaster that's the Trump administration, which is not only denying climate change, but it's actually going backwards with substantial rollbacks and things, including appliance efficiency standards and things. And this plan doesn't quite get us there. The goal is 790,000 metric tons, which is consumption-based, not just direct emission-based, which is substantially more than a lot of studies take into consideration. And this gets about 2/3 of that.
The ECC actions get us 40% of the way, and that's for sector-based. The 790 is not the consumption-based.
Say again.
The 790
Is consumption-based.
it's not consumption-based.
Sector-based.
Sector-based, yep.
And we're about 40%. So we do need the additional actions, and they're listed here, and there's a lot of them, and we kind of probably need to do all of them. I guess the next steps for me, the one thing I found in this that I hope will be the next steps, which is an implementation plan. And an implementation plan that when I did these plans and they were implemented, that's because they had three things going for them. They were specific in what they were trying to do, and they had a budget associated with them, and then they had a timeline associated with them and a responsible party. And when you have all four of those things, sorry, I said three, it's four, then actually it's an implementable, actionable plan. So what I think one of the things we should do next with this is come up with a short-term implementation plan, take these actions that we know are going to be implemented in the next 1 to 2 years, and then maybe a 5-year action plan, say, these are specifically what we're going to do. Here's how much they're going to cost and the funding sources. This is who's responsible for them and by when. And when you have all that responsibility laid out, then they become, there's an accountability mechanism. We can say, oh, you were supposed to do this, and you were supposed to do this, and please do this, and please do that. And so to get a plan to actually get to be implemented, you need those specifics of that action plan. And I hope that's what the next thing we do.
Just a small clarification. Are you thinking of that similar to the consolidated housing plan that you heard about last week, where you adopt this and then every year there's kind of an action plan that comes with it? Or are you thinking that you want that as part of this before you adopt it?
Oh, then we won't adopt it for quite a while because we're not there yet. So yeah, I think we should move forward with this, and then the next step, which will be brought back in a timely fashion, would be that action plan with the responsibility matrix to it. Okay. Otherwise, we won't adopt this for months.
Never get there.
But we need to move forward.
Right.
Keep moving forward.
All right. Claire?
Thank you. I completely agree with what Alan just said about next steps for an implementation plan. I also agree with what Alan said about, the cost and the benefit piece going hand in hand, and there's definitely a real cost if we don't do anything. And our efforts, I think, will have a tangible payoff even while we grapple with how we pay for them up front. So, to that end, I would like to see, and I know it's challenging in terms of estimating some of these things, but maybe as part of this implementation piece, kind of an outline of how much each action item would cost us and alongside how far they get us towards our goal. so that can help us prioritize what we're doing when. I also think, and you know, this is the challenge of wanting to focus on everything, but the piece about resiliency, I think, may need to have its own place of consideration, because it's a little bit different than the attempts to reduce carbon emissions. It's trying to deal with the fact that we didn't do this 25 years ago. And so I think that needs to get some attention. And then on the consumption bucket, so we've had some work sessions around Northwest Natural and the TSP, but we really haven't dug into the consumption bucket. So can you forecast when we might have a work session that really looks at some of the actions under there and gives us some quantitative information about how those proposed actions would move us towards our goal?
Yeah, so the CAP 2.0 Stage 2, which was a part of the initial project plan, talked about working with or thinking about what individuals, households, and neighborhoods can do, which is really what we see as the way we would sort of work on that consumption bucket. So I anticipate that would be at least next year, like mid-year or later, because we want to work with our community partners to understand what programs are out there already and where the holes are, and come back to you with information about really how we can most effectively work on that bucket.
Okay. And then to what Betty was saying about trees, I would actually really love, I think it's way past time to have a work session on our urban forestry program. I've actually been meaning to send out a work session poll on that and haven't been able to get to that yet. I had spoken to the city manager a few months ago about that. So I definitely think that would be timely and really tie into this work around resiliency and carbon emission reductions, as well as all the other things that our robust urban forestry program provides for our city. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Betty, Emily, sorry, Betty. Emily gets one, and then Greg. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. I know this has been a huge amount of work, and I really appreciate it. But we know it's not going to be enough. I mean, this is great. We've picked these numbers out. That's what we're going to try to get to. But it's going to be so slow. I mean, even though this huge basket of ideas, I just think people need to really think that, yeah, this is good, but it's not enough to really do it. And we need to expand our methods. I'm really looking forward to the things that get beyond the large stakeholders and back to those of us with hot dogs. And Councilor Pryor said that we want to minimize the impact on the community. And of course we do, but to be successful, we can't be minimal. This is going to take radical changes. And these are sort of opening the door changes that people, we hope, will be amenable to. But the reality is that we need to push that door open really fast and all the way. So this is good, but somehow we need to all get together and get a real bonfire of energy going. We're too complacent about this, and that's one road to pick is complacency. But if we really want to believe we're making a difference, we've got to take this and move it exponentially, as well as every single thing we can think of to do. So I really appreciate all this work. I appreciate the enthusiasm. We need more. We need it sooner. We need to get real. Thanks.
Okay, Greg.
So Chelsea, what's our communication strategy around getting this word into, our citizens and, being able to encourage them to, be an active part of this effort? I think it's really critical that, we have a marketing plan, for lack of a better, terminology on it, to really communicate what this is going to do, how is it going to go. 700,000, tons of, carbon is not going to resonate with a lot of people, But, we need to get to, Alan's point, we also need to communicate what is our investment versus what we get on return.
Do you want me to speak about the communications plan?
Yeah.
Sure.
What are we going to be doing? Are we going to be having people go to door? Are we going to have, a media campaign? What are going to be the strategies to, because we really have to reach all of our citizens to encourage them to get on board.
Absolutely. So I think a piece of that will tie into our individual action, household action component that I talked about before. We've also been working with an agency called Drawn to come up with a communications platform that we're hoping to roll out early next year that will help kind of brand all of our ECC actions and help us show the community, like, here's our unified effort. So I think it has to be from both angles, as you're kind of saying, like, show what we're doing as large organizations, but also share, like, what can each individual do to act and be a part of this process. I think we need to do more, and we've got some ideas for coming up next year.
Hey, Mike.
Today I was, for a very short period of time before work, I was online checking out the options that'll help me plan for retirement someday. Probably going to be in my 80s, I think, at this point. But there's an awful lot of programs online and websites online that let you affect multiple factors. An entire page full of the different things about what you make and how old you are and at what time you want to retire and what standard of living you expect, and just a cornucopia of different factors that you can drop down menu, alter, change, play with. In doing that, it gives you an output of a graph of, hey, the money you did in Social Security and whatever you got saved, here's, 71, sorry, you're out of money. And it gives you a response about what practical planning and practical actions look like in terms of outcome. I think we ought to have, at least as a bare minimum, along the lines of what Councilor Evans is saying, people to understand by looking at their day-to-day actions what little alteration they might make that has a real impact. So let them figure it out and play with it a little bit. That's not that complex of that's a spreadsheet that you put some JavaScript into, and it's not a complicated website to build. And let them be a part of this solution by altering their world in ways that are comfortable to them, to see what kind of consumption changes have what kind of impact. And then you can talk about the opportunities involved in planning for your part, rather than top down, tell them you have to, educate them. Let them play and see what if, and it might be interesting enough that you might get people to be involved that might not otherwise want to, because there's an opportunity for them to do that. And I'll just say that, in this entire issue of climate change and just smart ecological sense, I've never understood why those who are very big advocates of it don't try to make the religious right a part of their process. And there's a point here, because there's a huge component of that mentality that says we have to take care of the place and that they feel a duty to it. There are natural allies here across political lines with this, if it's approached the right way with the right kind of content, rather than kind of dogmatic content and, ideological content, but unifying content instead. So it's just some thoughts.
If I may just give credit to 350 Eugene, who's put out a program that's much to what you're talking about. And Linda Perrine, I believe, is in the audience. And I'm sure she'd be happy to share more about that. It's the Eugene Carbon Free Challenge.
Alan, did you want one more round?
Yeah, a couple more. There's 88 actions in this plan, and then there's the 12 that are additional strategies. So of those, how many of those are City of Eugene actions?
You know, I haven't added up the number that are just City of Eugene. I could do that for you.
Yeah, that'd be good. That would be good to know. And how many are community or other actors need to do it? And I guess another question would be, how do we get the equity panel had a bunch of recommendations. How do we get those recommendations evaluated and integrated into this? What's the process for doing that?
So we're working on that a little bit internally now, but we have a lot more to do. When we've looked at those actions, we actually, for the most part, it's been a nice integration. There's not necessarily much that's in conflict with what we're already doing. It's figuring out how to integrate whatever they requested into what we're doing. So I mentioned one of their actions today, and it was really based on education around a number of topics around climate. So as we move forward, we hope to do more outreach with business, for example, and that could be a component of how we work with business to say, like, we're really hearing that we need to do more education. Could you be a partner in that? So I see a lot of potential there, and I think there's a lot of potential to work with those marginalized communities to figure out how, and we're hoping to continue that work with them.
Right, many of them are around resiliency. The majority of them are. So on the front page here, it uses the word playbook. I really don't like the word playbook. It makes it sound like this is a list of potential actions that we could choose to do or not, when in reality, we need to do every single one of them that's in here, plus a whole bunch more. This morning, you were on the radio on KLCC and you used the word roadmap. And I much prefer that. This is a roadmap to get us to where we need to go, which is to meet our CRO goals. So maybe we could change that and make better messaging about it. Something Mike said triggered another thought, which is that there's a heck of a lot of creativity in this community. And there's a lot of well-meaning people with good ideas, and we need to figure out a way to tap into that. One of the things that I've seen other communities do is to pull together a fund like you were talking about and solicit projects that would reduce greenhouse gases and help people pay for them and gain the benefits from them and allocate them to the CRO goals. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen in the community beyond what we've done in this community action plan that we might be able to trigger if we set it up right. So that'd be a community offset program that could get us a lot of relatively cheap and cost-effective greenhouse gas reduction projects.
So I just want to jump in here with a couple of reactions to this conversation and to the documents. And the first is that, one thing I think we should keep in mind as we talk about the costs and benefits is that actually this work is compelling us to be a better community. Like, it's compelling us to look at equity. It's compelling us to look at the quality of our housing and the location of our housing. It's compelling us to look at how people get from point A to point B through our transportation system. And when we look at, it's not all linear. It's actually circular in some fundamental way where we wrap our arms around it. And when you look at just the transportation fuels and look at the equity actions, action T16, public campaign on racism, homophobia, sexual violence, ableism in public transportation. I mean, that's a good thing that we should do. It doesn't have a linear relationship necessarily to our greenhouse gas emissions, but it has a quality of life contribution and also will enable people to use public transit and feel safe. And so we are creating, it ties in with the kindness campaign, just saying, right? We're acting on that. How do we embrace the whole community? That's my first point. My second point is that, as I look at this chart of the blue, the salmon, and the green actions, I think as we think about it, some of those things are farther along than others in terms of how much research you've done and how much you know about them. Some may be a little bit easier to do than others. As you go forward and do more research, we'll realize that. And so I'm supporting this idea that, council improves this and there's an implementation plan. And I would just suggest that in that implementation plan, there might be some, Alan has reached that, saying what are the 2-year goals and what are the 5-year goals, a little bit of a timeline. And I think increasing clarity around which are the heavier lifts and which aren't, because I think in terms of a sort of community dashboard and a sense that we're making progress, it will be good to have annual successes. The idea of the consolidated plan as a model with an action plan every year would be extraordinarily helpful, I think, and empowering to the community to feel like, yep, we said we were going to do these things within a 12-month cycle, and now we're doing them. And so I think it would help with the dashboard, and also just, and also for us to sort of weigh out in any given year the stuff that's really a heavy lift and a hard push that's going to take us a long time to figure out versus the things that we think we're going to be able to galvanize public support around it. We're going to be able to make those decisions a little bit faster. So I think that lens going forward would be helpful. I do love the color coding. Actually, I find that chart incredibly helpful. So any other comments from council? Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, the other piece is that one of the things that I love about this document and that I look forward to is how this can help us connect the dots across the work that we're doing. Transit being really the critical one. We are facing 2 big conversations with LTD about transit tomorrow and moving ahead. Both of those have big implications in terms of our climate recovery goals and how we proceed, and continuing to connect the dots about where do we make the most progress in terms of enabling people to use transit, what do we roll out the fastest, what are the greenhouse gas, fossil fuel usage questions that are, what's the balance, how does that balance out? And so I'm just I'm looking forward to council kind of connecting those dots and helping the community connect those dots between those really fundamental conversations. So, okay, any other comments? All right, thank you very much. Excellent report, and we're eager for the next step. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are adjourned until the public hearing.